All right, we got Trish from Teacher Therapy. Again, thank you so much for joining me here today. I came across one of your videos. I was super interested and I wanted to talk to you more about this. Having tried to work with schools in the past on safety and security and violence prevention types of programs, I realized really quickly that a lot of them didn't really care about what I had to say as an expert. They didn't care about what I had to say as a human, and that they were very driven by their own internal and personal goals and drive and ambitions and ego, quite frankly. And so I wanted to definitely reach out, and here we are today. Please tell the audience just a little bit about who you are, where you're coming from, and then ultimately how you ended up getting into teaching.
Yeah, so I am originally from Texas. I graduated college in 2012, and my original career path was going to be youth ministry. I thought I'd be working in churches with teenagers, but I ended up getting married and moving to the Midwest, and I didn't have any internship opportunities. And I found myself with a degree, wondering what on earth am I doing? So I kind of hopped around, went to Walmart, worked at a cheesecake job, and I was just feeling like, there's got to be something that I'm supposed to be doing. So I ended up working at an after school program that was faith based, and that kind of connected me with my first inner city charter school. And I was just complaining to my boss one day and saying, like, I just feel like there's something I'm supposed to be doing. So she nicely just started sending me random emails. And one of the emails that I got was from Teach for America. And it's so cheesy, but I clicked on it and I literally started crying when I watched the promo video. So it was showing these like inner city children that they were just in need of education. And a little bit about my own background. I actually come from a really tough background, a lot of trauma, a lot of, things that a lot of inner city kids deal with. So two of the things that really got me out of that situation was number one, my faith in God, but number two, learning to read, loving books, loving education. And so I thought, how cool is this? Like I can impart something that was life-saving for me to kids. And so I jumped into Teach for America. And just a little bit about the program. Typically, they take teachers that, don't have a background in education. It could be like business or finance or just anything as long as they have a bachelor's degree. And they choose a certain amount of people to just kind of jump into the classroom after 5 weeks of training. So I had a random training in Tulsa, Oklahoma for 5 weeks to teach me how to be a teacher. And then they just throw you into a classroom. And it's normally kind of a high needs environment. It's some of the toughest schools in America. And that's kind of how I got my start in education. And so for that 2-year program, basically you're learning how to teach while you're on the job, but then you're taking master's degree classes at night so that by the end of the, end of the 2 years, you have your master's degree in education or at least a teacher certification. So that's kind of how I dove into the world of teaching. Not something that I had really planned, but something I found myself involved in.
Wow, they're very interesting. And I'm sure that there's a lot of people who go through that program now because it's you're coming in with a fresh, unique perspective, a fresh, unique experience. How many years had it been since you graduated college from when you entered the Teaching for America?
Only 1 year. I kind of took my time with college. I graduated high school in 2005, and I was just on the like stay into college into the world in plan. But like 7 years later, I'm like, okay, like I need to figure out what I'm doing. So I ended up graduating in 2012 and starting Teach for America in 2013.
Okay, interesting. And so what really it's kind of almost like the military. When somebody joins the military straight out of high school, they have a different mentality and a different perspective on the world when they join. And so they're very much indoctrinated into the military right away. Whereas when you have people who join the military, after they've got a few years of experience, in this case, you said you graduated high school in '05, and now, it's several years later, you're going into the teaching pipeline. What I've learned in my time in the military is that when people join later on in life, they act very differently and they have very different viewpoints and perspectives as everybody else in who had joined earlier. Did you find yourself having different perspectives and viewpoints of the other teachers?
I think it's a lot of it almost feels like a cult indoctrination program, Teach for America. It's like there's heavy Kool-Aid. So it's a really weird dynamic. I think they look for people that either have a big heart and just like totally are self-sacrificial, or I think a lot of people that wanted to have something really nice on their resume. Because back in TFA's heyday, it was kind of marketed as something that only Ivy League people get, and they do the inner city teaching thing before they become doctors and lawyers. So it's a really mix, like a blend of really interesting people. And it made for a weird environment, but it kind of felt like the idea was that you should work pretty much 80 hours. You should sacrifice any and everything. You should take any kind of beating, literally or metaphorically, for the children. And so it was just very strange. I think they kind of tried to find ambitious people on purpose, I think, with like super high GPAs and tons of like community service, thinking that, okay, these kind of people, you can throw them in the classroom no matter how hard it is and they'll succeed. But I just ended up realizing really quick that kind of the picture that they were painting and my reality was really different. They kind of really painted a picture that, oh, the kids are going to be so grateful to have you. And they make you feel really special and elite, like you're the cream of the crop. If anyone can do it, you can. And there's a huge pressure that if you complain or say what you're really seeing, it's because you're not dedicated enough to the field, or so you're not sacrificing enough, you're not trying hard enough. And so it's just a very bizarre blend in the particular program I was in. And then on top of that, I got put in like a really, really high performing charter school that to me, it was almost like double TFA, just the expectations and the standards and the rhetoric. And so to make a long story short, I felt like, kids were not really behaving. They weren't really doing their work. They were giving me really, really high, standards and expectations for data and standardized tests and metrics. Yet the kids are doing absolutely nothing, but it's somehow my fault. And so it was just this really weird cycle of thinking, okay, maybe I need to have more engaging lesson plans. Maybe I need to change my approach with talking to kids. Maybe I need to be more dedicated. But the weird thing about education today is that none of that focus is put on the kids whatsoever. It's kind of all blamed on the teacher. So to kind of circle back to your question, I think, yes, I instantly kind of realized like, this is really weird. They're telling me I should be having these results, yet, the kids are not doing what they're supposed to do, yet I'm being blamed for it. And I saw a big breakdown there.
Wow. Already off the bat, I'm seeing so much similarity to, again, my time in the military, because when we were in Afghanistan, and obviously that place, was a, in my opinion, it was a waste of time. And really, it's really sad and unfortunate, conflict that we were in for so long. But the Afghans would never be performing well. And when we came time to report up to our higher command what their status was, I actually reported these guys suck. They're not doing good at all. And I was actually reprimanded quite viciously over the fact that I was saying that these people are not taking it seriously. They're not combat ready. It sounds pretty similar, as if though if you were to say these students aren't taking it seriously, they're not thankful for our presence, we need to rechange our approach, that you would be chastised as well.
Definitely. And yeah, to me, I think I kind of have maybe what's considered now to be a traditional mindset. My view is you do need to set standards high, but if there's no consequences that go with that, then most people aren't going to reach the bar. I think there's maybe 10% of people, in humanity that just have super internal high motivation and they work hard and they don't need anything else outside of them to meet a goal. I feel like that's relatively rare, and especially with children. So I would think, okay, if I set an assignment and say, this is the homework, and 60% of the class doesn't do it, and there's nothing I can do to give a consequence, of course they're not going to do it. Because like when I first got in education, I was thinking back to when I was a kid, in the 90s and early 2000s. And it's like, maybe if you didn't do your homework, you're sitting out of recess or you're getting a phone call home, or, you're being, made to make up the work when other people are having free time. But the more that I would just kind of implement those practices, the more I was told, oh, no, no, you can't do that. Or you can't hold them out from recess for not doing work. Or like, oh, no, you can't have them do any kind of consequences, not even like writing lines, just kind of the little things that worked when I was a kid. They're like, you absolutely cannot do that. And so I just found myself, doing everything I can to be like a motivational speaker for the kids. But it's like, ultimately, at the end of the day, if they can consistently not do what they're supposed to do and nothing negative happens to them, then a great majority of kids just won't do it. And I think in an ideal scenario, you could call parents and say, look, my hands are tied with consequences in the classroom. I can't hold them back from recess. I can't do much, but I'm letting you know there's these standards in the classroom and your child is consistently failing to meet them. Can you help me out? And then the parent would do what you can't as a teacher. But then I found that I was getting reprimanded from parents complaining to the principal that, oh, Miss Trish is being way too negative. All she has is negative things to say about my child. And I'm thinking like, okay, like, no conversation of what is my child doing that would make the teacher have a negative report. It's all about, teacher, why are you so negative? So I really, at the end of the day, eventually found out in education that so much of it is about lying. Teachers make up scores, teachers pass kids that shouldn't get passed, teachers tell parents that, oh, your child is doing amazing. What a fantastic little snowflake you have. And it's all lies. You're doing it to preserve ourselves, to stay out of the hot seat. And I think, administration and the people that are in the system are invested to have teachers do that. And even within the Teach for America program, I can tell you a quick story. Basically, in the 5 week kind of like teacher boot camp, we were supposed to produce what's considered to be 1 to 3 years of academic gain within a few weeks of summer school, having never taught before. And we measured this by, these self administered tests that we gave to kids, and they were like reading tests and different things. And so there was a huge pressure to show those gains, whether or not the kids did that well. And since we're assessing them ourselves and some of it's subjective, we can easily say, oh, yeah, they made 2 years of academic gain. And then that kind of fed into this program's, reputation that the teachers we pick are so special and amazing that they could get 2 years of academic gain when their regular teachers couldn't do it all school year. So it was just this enormous pressure, and you're really punished if you tell the truth and rewarded for lying. So it's a huge mess.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but you said this is strictly with inner city schools, correct?
So I've heard from a lot of teachers in, suburban, higher, upper class schools that are moving to some of these methods too. They call it like standards based grading, and, some people call it equitable grading, but it's this idea that there's never really deadlines. You can turn in things infinitely. And essentially you might have 5 assignments, but the teacher can only pick the top 3 assignments to choose as your grade. So you could like not turn in a ton of things and just turn in a few things, and the lowest you can ever get is a 50, even if you turn in nothing. So essentially, there's a ton of grade inflation, even in some of the nicer school districts, too.
Wow, but these examples that you're talking about from your experience, though, that was strictly within the teaching for America. That was within the inner cities. Is that correct?
Yes. Mhm.
So they're basically falsifying this investment in the education of the kids who everybody claims, hey, these kids need the most attention. They need to be taken care of. We need to be investing in their education. And what they're doing is they're creating a false product in terms of educating these kids, and they're not educating these kids. And what's that going to do? That's going to lead to a perpetual negative behavioral cycle as if school doesn't matter to these kids. Am I on the right track?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think it's one of those things that it makes everybody happy, short term happy. Because the kids are happy because they see, oh, yeah, I got an A, I'm going to the next grade. The parents are happy because the teacher's not complaining about the kid. The district's happy because they can put on their state report card, oh, we have a 97% graduation rate. Oh, we have a 2% suspension rate. When the truth of the matter is, all of the numbers are complete lies. And so, students, when they actually are tested with a test that really measures where they're at, a lot of high schoolers are reading maybe on a fifth or sixth grade level and they're graduating. And, because of a lot of programs, maybe they're able to get into college, but when they face a real system for the first time in their life that's really looking at the product they're creating, they're failing out. They cannot do the work, and unfortunately, I think a lot of the soft skills are not always there either because they were kind of made to be lazy in many instances. They weren't told, how to be respectful to authority. They didn't always get a lot of, cooperation skills, because that's a whole nother topic. The behaviors are just kind of off the charts in a lot of these schools. And instead of us saying, this is the standard, you need to meet it, we'll do everything we can to help you meet it, we just keep moving the standards and redefining what good behavior is. So a girl that cusses out the teacher is no longer disrespectful and defiant. She's advocating for herself. She's speaking her truth. She's sharing her feelings, and the teacher is just expected to kind of roll with it and even affirm her for these crazy things. And so I just think it's the train is completely derailed at this point.
And what that translates into out in society, we wonder why we're seeing this immense rise in violent crime. Well, we're seeing an immense rise in violent crime because we're not conditioning kids properly. We're not teaching kids properly on how to treat other human beings and how the universal laws happen to exist. So when somebody sees somebody with like a phone or a purse or a car or whatever it is that they want, what do? They go up to them and they take it. And then if the person tries to fight back, or if they're not getting their way, if they don't get to just or take something from a store or throw a flash riot, which we're seeing all over the place in Chicago right now. I don't know if you've seen that in the news at all, but they're being told that that's acceptable behavior. And it starts where? It starts all the way back here with these falsified reports and these facade standards in schools. It's remarkable.
Definitely. Yeah, it's been really sad for me too, because like we were kind of talking about before we got on here, a lot of this stuff seems to have sprung up in like the last 5 years. I feel like 2020, something really tipped, with all of the rioting and the crazy stuff. But I think even between like 2013 and 2015, when I was just getting in the classroom, I remember there was like, riots and things in like Ferguson, Missouri and different things. So it feels like
Right.
it's been a slow build up. And it's like overnight, it seems like we're kind of in America that we don't recognize in certain pockets. Things that never would have been acceptable are now praised again. Like, oh, look at these people standing up for their rights. Or the other thing is there's like a lot of, victimization. They'll say, oh, well, if it wasn't for all of the oppression and all of, these systems and structures that are so wrong, that these people that are oppressed wouldn't be crying out. And so it kind of, there's a lot of that in the education system too. They'll say, oh, well, if the student is upset, it's got to be because the teacher is so oppressive, or, the systems and structures of traditional school is so oppressive. So it's either, repainting the picture to say something bad is heroic, or it's saying, well, of course they can't help it because, the teachers are so bad, the system is so bad, law enforcement is so bad. It's like everybody is being blamed and no accountability is being fostered in young people. And I think it's really sad too when they're seeing a lot of adults model this behavior. And I just really feel bad for kids that are coming up in this day and age because, the media and entertainment and the news and just everything, basically wrong is being painted as beautiful, courageous, and right. And things that are truly good, beautiful, and courageous are being painted as being wrong.
Absolutely. So I have my own theories, and we're not going to dive too far into them here right now, but based off of the things that I've seen across the world, when certain theories infiltrate the education system, that's when you begin to truly get to cause dissension and rot out the empire from the inside, rot out your enemies from the inside once you get into the education system. And so I feel as if, though you're absolutely correct, there's been this kind of like setting the stage over the course of the last several years of a little bit here, a little bit there. And then 2020 was really the catalyst to amplify that. And what I'm really concerned with is what you just mentioned. As we see kids coming up who are in like fifth grade right now, over the next 10 years as they enter high school and they enter adulthood, what are the profound effects going to be on society then? If they've been completely taught their entire life that it's okay to behave this way and that nothing is your fault and that it's all about the system's fault, what type of implications is that going to have in terms of violence and violent crime and people getting along in society? Do you see do you see there being a way to have a positive influence on those kids without being involved in the education industry directly?
Interesting question. I've thought about it a lot. I feel as if, being a teacher, I almost felt like I was having to be a part of a system that's like helping to corrupt kids. And that's why I initially just was like, I can't do this anymore. But I think that if there was a movement of volunteers, like adult volunteers, that went into communities, that taught kids to read, that served as mentors, especially male ones, because in a lot of these communities, there's an epidemic of fatherlessness. And so I think if something like that existed, that would help a lot. Just like role models are so important. And, kids having positive, safe, healthy relationships with people that can teach them right from wrong. I think, back in the day, so to speak, there were communities that had things like, churches and, Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. And, there was like neighbors were looking out for each other's kids. And there were so many different structures that were teaching some kind of morality, even when kids came from a tough background. But my fear today is that that's almost completely gone. It's like if a kid already has a rough home situation and then they go to school, they're not even being taught, right from wrong in school anymore. And then they, go into the community and all of these, horrible things are allowed to happen. And so I just feel like almost kids are being enveloped by negative messages everywhere they turn. And so if there could somehow be a movement, I think, of volunteers that could be a good influence, that would be helpful, I think, for sure.
What do you think about charter schools, like privately ran schools, not charter schools that receive like public funding or any of that, but strictly private schools, being able to run their own education curriculums, their own education programs. What are your thoughts on those types of schools?
I think in kind of when I first entered education, I heard about a lot of them doing really, really well because they were very strict. They held very high standards. Kids were not allowed to just go wild. Kids were required to do work. Parents would be required to volunteer. It was something where everybody was bought into high standards and expectations. But even something has changed with that. One charter school that was very successful had a motto, work hard and be nice. But in 2020, they got rid of that because it's racist. I kid you not. And so it's just like, I feel like these weirdo mentalities are infiltrating everywhere. And
Yeah.
so my fear and concern at this point in culture is that even if, schools try to do the right thing, they're constantly having to look over their shoulder for like parents that want to sue them or, some activist that wants to dox them or somebody that's saying, you're not, implementing this ideology enough. You must be this fill in the blank, bad term. And so I'm just worried about where we are at in culture and how much pressure there is. I think if you could create these private schools and charter schools with people that are bought in all the way around and parents agree to it, then it could work. But my concern is just there's so much pressure within education and everybody is bowing the knee and saying, oh, well, I don't want people to think I'm racist or I don't want people to think I'm this or that, that they're caving, to these ideologies. And even once good institutions are now falling too. So I know that sounds really pessimistic, but that's just what I've seen over the years. Cause I initially had hope. I was like, okay, there are schools that are pushing, even Black and brown students to do well. They're not giving them excuses. They're showing, that Black students can do just as well in science as white students. But the weird thing is that I honestly feel like what's happening now is racist against Black people because in some of these like professional development meetings that are kind of CRT based, they'll say things like, oh, the scientific method is considered to be something that's white. Punctuality is white, an insistence on facts and logic that's white. And so it's just so bizarre. It's an upside down world where, everything that is good, they're essentially saying, oh, those are white things. And again, they're like looking at, the bottom line, the worst behavior and saying, oh, that's Black culture. We just have to change our standards, change our tests, change the way we talk about things because these things are beautiful. And to me, it's just like, dude, that's the most racist mindset somebody can have, ironically.
Thank you so much for saying this. I had this a group of young guys who were doing some work for me, and sorry, my kid in the background, I was running around. These three young Black dudes, and awesome guys, best workers I've ever had. I would do anything for these guys to this day. Like they're still just like amazing. And we were talking about school. I was kicked out of two high schools. I was sent to the juvenile behavioral rehab program, all that stuff. And so everything you're saying resonates with me. When you don't hold kids to a standard, like the second school I went to, I could flip a desk, tell the teacher to F off and like not have to actually do anything and still pass. That's what happened until I got thrown out of that one, sent into the juvie rehab, behavioral rehab center. Guess what? Point system, cops, shut up. I mean, you were getting locked in closets, which I still don't even know if I really agree with that whole process, but there was a lot of consequences and I had to really straighten myself up if I wanted to breathe without having to worry. So, when it comes back to the racist part, we were talking about different types of schools and they said, yeah, well, I went to a Black school and they labeled this one school in Chicago that's just like notoriously bad. And I looked at him for a second. And I said, why is that a Black school? And he goes, well, what do you mean? Because it's ghetto. See, that is such a huge problem to me. Why do we have to associate behaviors with the race? And Martin Luther King, and I don't just say this because of like a racial context. We judge. I have a dream that people are judged by the content of their character and not the color of their skin. When did we lose sight of that? Where do you think this whole labeling of behaviors is being associated with race? Where do you think that has come from?
Well, it's kind of interesting that you asked that because I've kind of been clueless. I've just recently, within the last few months, been learning a little bit more about Marxism and how, within that system, people are painted as oppressors versus the oppressed. and how you have to go to so-called marginalized communities to get them to want to rise up and fight systems and tear them down. And it's starting to make a lot of sense because I would get like weird comments sometimes on my YouTube channels. And I wasn't sure like exactly what is it that people are talking about. And then the more that I researched, the more it's starting to make a lot of sense. And so I do wonder if there is some of that going on. Like, these are actually very systematic philosophies that you can just trade out the group. So in this case, instead of just looking at economics, they're looking at, race and getting people to feel oppressed so that they'll rebel and that they'll fight. And within these systems, since the focus so much is on race, then you can't actually look at individual people's decisions. You can't say, are you making any decisions that are leading to your poor economic outcomes? Are you, because, I joked in one of my recent debates that I did with a guy about whether progressive education policies work or not. And he was, big on like, talking about white privilege and systematic racism and, being an anti-racist educator and all the buzzwords. And I said, you know what? Tell me if I'm wrong, but systematic racism doesn't make me play Fortnite for 3 hours instead of doing my homework and studying for my test. There is a certain point at which people have to take responsibility for their individual choices and the outcomes. I definitely get that, poverty can be cyclical and it can be very hard to break out of it. But there's so many people that have done it, and there's people that come from all over the world to America for that very purpose because they're not in a caste system. They actually can come here and get an education and get a degree and get a job. And I get, I never want to oversimplify people's troubles because, like I mentioned before, I have generations of like trauma and poverty and mental illness and addiction and all kind of things on both sides of my family. And, most of them died in that situation or still in that situation. So I don't want to minimize, what it's like to not have a good start in life, what it's like to not have support. But at the same time, I would say if anybody anywhere in the world has a chance to get out of that, it is in this country. And I think that unfortunately, we're just pumping young people so full of these ideologies that they're missing out on those chances.
That's so beautifully stated, and it's so true that America is not perfect by any means. No country is, but no other country on the face of the planet are you given as many opportunities as you are here in order to elevate yourself beyond your current set of circumstances. Nowhere else on the face of the planet. And like you said, people flock to the United States for those chances. Yet it seems to every single person I've ever talked to from Venezuela, from Cuba, from, South America, North Korea, China, even, they all say the same thing is that America's a beautiful place. We don't understand what's happening to your republic, your democracy. And then you talk to 18-year-old woke kid and they're like, "Oh, this place sucks. It's horrible." Who has the mature perspective on the world and the way that things are working here? I don't think it's the 18-year-old who was raised within the confines and the safety of the United States of America. That's for sure. I think it's the person who risked their life to make it to these lands in order to have that opportunity. And you're absolutely right. They are being misled and misfed. Quite frankly, kind of going further back into what I was saying here with the external influence, it is Marxist doctrine. It is communist doctrine. I've seen, a lot of this, Chinese propaganda influence being, whether it comes in the form of money to our universities, these universities are being funded. Out of the 600,000 foreign exchange students, I don't know if you knew this or not, but 400 out of the 600,000 foreign exchange students are from China.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
And I don't think it's because China wants their people to learn about American democracy and republic. They're sending them to law school, chemical engineering school, so they can study the way that we develop products here in the United States so that they can influence our education institutions from the top all the way down to the bottom. And that's quite honestly where I've seen, this stuff coming from. And so it's really interesting from your perspective as the educator, somebody who's been directly involved in the system, and me externally as somebody who's been involved in strategic global affairs, to really be like, meshing up on this to where, it's hard to deny it. You mentioned something a moment ago, white privilege. What do you think that white privilege in the way that it is talked about is accurate? Do you believe in white privilege? What are your thoughts on this whole idea of being propagated of, hey, like white people are more privileged than you. They think they're better than you. They're automatically given better circumstances than you being anybody else of a different race. What are your thoughts on that whole thing?
I think that is such a complicated issue. I will say I was normally the only like Black little girl when I was growing up in different school situations. And so I was, routinely made fun of. And I didn't necessarily ever connect the dots that it could have had anything to do with my race. But looking back, so many of the things that they said were racial. Like they would call me Medusa because of my braids. They would call me Ronald McDonald, or the Forrest Gump guy because of my big red lips. And like there were so many things that I just, went through life as a younger person being like, oh, people are making fun of me. People don't like me. I'm not being, treated the same. And it didn't really dawn on me that it could have been anything racial. And so I do think that, there are truths and lies mixed through all of this stuff. I do think because of the country's history, there are definitely vestiges of racism left over. I think it can definitely be a regional thing too. So one time that I worked at a private Christian school that was like really wealthy, I thought that it was going to be like an awesome fit and awesome situation. But there was like racial things sent to me. I was treated terribly within the first 3 weeks of school. They drew up a petition to get me fired. There was like memes made about me. It was awful. And these were like little silly things like when my husband and I, who is white, ironically, go to Florida, there was weird instances that would happen in North Florida where my husband would even be like, that's weird. Like I saw that. So on one hand, I would say that there are some experiences that are unique to being Black that are negative and hurtful that white people just may not have. So I don't know whether I would call that privilege or not, but I do think it's a reality that a lot of people don't talk about. And, kind of what I, really like to emphasize with whatever topics I talk about is nuance, because I think because of our political situation, people have to pick a hard line on the left or a hard line on the right. But my thing is that if it's true, no matter who says it, I'm going to agree with it to the extent that it's true. But then if they go and say something false right after, and I'm going to say, okay, well, that part's false. So, so I say it's complicated. So I definitely think there are racial issues still in the United States. However, I would say the difference between now and like Jim Crow in the 1950s is that, hey, I could leave that school and work someplace else that was happy to hire me as a Black woman. I don't have to vacation in North Florida if I feel like people are being weird toward me. I think, the pockets and places that are racist and that you can feel it immediately, like, okay, I'm not wanted here. It's much easier to escape those situations. Whereas in, the 1950s, there's literally like, here's your Black only section and here's your white only section. There were literally, colleges and schools that are like, you can't come here if you're Black. And so I think that something else that I think plays a bigger hand is that, the economic position that somebody's coming from. So somebody that's wealthy and rich, whether they're Black, white, or Hispanic, they're going to have more opportunities a lot of times than someone that's poor. So for example, I known of a lot of students where, their parents are working all the time, or maybe it's a single mom. So they're spending all of their evenings and weekends to help take care of little brothers or sisters. Whereas somebody from a wealthy situation, they're probably getting summer enrichment, they're getting SAT prep programs. They oftentimes have multi-million-dollar schools with excellent programs. They have the cream of the crop teachers. Whereas I've worked at inner city, schools where like the floor is caving in. They literally detected like off the charts levels of radon in one of the schools I was working at, and there's just like, a lot of unqualified teachers, like long-term subs, constant turnover. So I think in that regard, whether the person is white or Black, if they're in a wealthy situation, they're definitely getting benefits and privileges, if you want to call them, that somebody from a poorer situation is not. So I kind of struggle with how to know exactly how to answer that. I do think that in 2023, as opposed to in 1953, there's a lot less holding Black people back based on the color of their skin. Just like solely based on being Black, there's a lot less holding them back. Maybe if they're in, the heart of Alabama somewhere, a place that's kind of very segregated, maybe they won't get hired for the job. I don't know. But there might be 45 other jobs that are specifically looking for somebody Black to work for them. And so I think at this point in our development as a country, the unpopular thing is I think the biggest thing holding Black people back is their own mindsets, attitudes, and habits. I truly, truly believe that. And I think that we've got to get at that in order to change outcomes instead of trying to so-called change every system in America.
So that's a really beautiful thing as well that you're saying. I'm huge on empowering people to elevate themselves, whether it comes to personal safety, self-defense, awareness, education. I don't ever believe in tearing down a system in order to build another one, another group of people or whatever up. So that brings up a really interesting point where when we talk about focusing on things like, oh, well, these people are privileged, or well, it's everybody else's fault. Do you? I once had a guy say to me that I didn't, and it was a totally ignorant statement on their part, I believe, but he told me that I don't understand Black culture, and I said, well, what do you mean by Black culture? And he goes, well, you just don't understand like the game. And he was talking about particularly in this area of the city where he was gang banging. I was working with a school doing a safety security project, and he told me I don't understand the game. What do you mean Black culture, the game? And he's talking about gang banging, drug dealing. Well, is that really the common? Is that what people commonly view Black culture as in the schools? Is that what's being propagated within our younger generation? And if so, where does that come from, and why?
I think that there is a big group identification with suffering within the Black community. I think as, Jim Crow and a lot of those structures were dismantled, a lot of the poverty remained. And so I think that there's certain mindsets within poverty where you don't trust the authority, you don't trust the government, you don't trust teachers, you don't trust cops. And I would say, the farther back you look in history, people had a reason to not trust cops and to not trust the government and to not trust because there was actively system holding them back. Now, maybe as you get to the 70s and 80s, a lot of that is dwindling. But I remember my mom even still talking about really, really overt racism and things that she was dealing with in the workplace. A lot of that, starts to calm down more in the 90s. So I think, the farther you get out, the less overt racism there is. But when you're in a community that shares stories generationally of what happened to great grandma, what happened to grandma, in my case, what happened to my mom, they would pass on a lot of those mindsets to me, like, hey, be careful trusting white people. They'll smile to your face and stab you in the back the minute you turn around. And maybe they did have some of those experiences, but I think there's a huge survival mindset. And that's probably what they mean when they say, like, oh, other people don't understand. I think that there is like a mindset that there's a lack of opportunities in the neighborhoods, and the only way to make money is through, being in a gang, and in areas where there is a lot of gang violence. There's like a pressure that, if you don't go along, cover, the gangs, that kind of thing, approve of them, then you could be a target. So there's also a lot of fear within the communities. And I just think that unfortunately, probably like vestiges of, the older generation's experience with the past, they don't really feel like still being a doctor or a lawyer is for people from the hood, so to speak. They kind of see whatever is surrounding them as their pool of opportunities. There's also, I think, a lot of pressure in those communities to stay close to home, generationally, to not like leave the nest and like go to like other states and different things. So I do think there's a lot of complex realities within the communities. And that's where I feel like the mindsets need to change. I think that a lot of those ideas about everybody white being like racist and against us, like that's not helpful and that's not true. I think especially in 2023. And the belief too, I think that education is white is something that obviously like completely needs to go. But I just think that education is not a priority for a lot of places within the Black community. It's not something that is necessarily like passed to kids. There is a glorification of gang culture and violence and clubs and all of that stuff, life's of crime. And they don't see a way out of that. And so I think what schools have done in those neighborhoods is, instead of saying there is a way out, let us show you. I think they've kind of given up and just said, hey, your reality is great. Hey, college is not for everyone. Hey, speak your truths and we'll pass you. And then at that case, like the educational system has washed the kids out of their hair. They're like, I'm done. We're done. So it's really complicated, I think. But to me, the solution to that is mindset changes.
And so, what would you, if you had like a picture perfect scenario where you would receive the funding and you would receive the resources, what would you do in order to positively influence, kids who are coming up within that type of a belief system?
Yeah, I would really encourage them to have a dream and a vision for what they want for their life, and to know the steps that it's going to require to get there, and to have an eye in their everyday life of strengthening those skills, those mindsets, those attitudes that will eventually link up to their goal. I think whenever there is, like poverty or different things, it's very much a let's survive the day and let's do whatever we can to get through the day. And I think that, when you're struggling to like pay bills and you're struggling, with people dying and broken homes and all of the things that are real realities within the so-called good, there's not a lot of dreaming, there's not a lot of vision. And so when they say, hey, if you sell these drugs, you're going to get, $300, right now, instantly, that's going to be a lot more appealing than somebody saying, like, okay, I'm going to work at McDonald's, and get a little bit of money and then I'm going to save up to go to college. It's just that long range dream isn't there. So I would encourage people to really have a dream and a vision for their life and to know what steps it takes. And some things I do think are genuinely hard. I do think poverty is generally a hard situation, because in a lot of these homes, maybe the kids do have to work, when they're 15 or 16 to help pay bills. There's a lot more responsibilities and they grow up a lot faster when they're having to take care of little brothers and sisters and when there's violence surrounding them all the time. So a lot of those things, I'm not entirely sure if we could fix all of them. But I would also say I really wish people that have succeeded in the Black community would do more to like help the community by telling them to have good virtues and values and morals. But I feel like so much in like rap music and so-called Black culture, it's just horrible. Like I completely hate it. I think it's absolutely abominable. But those are the heroes. And so I think it's very complex. Truthfully speaking, I know this is not popular with a lot of people, but it's just what I think. I think as the Black community kind of left some of the core tenets of a biblical worldview, things got really bad because within a biblical worldview, you wait until you're married to have like sex and children. You don't leave your wife and cheat on them. You don't have, five side girls. Girls are not out on the streets like Daisy Dukes. You care for your children. You teach them to do the right thing, to tell the truth, to love your neighbor. Like so many values that are within the Christian faith are conducive to having a good life, even if it's not a rich life. But I feel like, as a lot of the churches have gone in really strange woke directions or just completely fallen apart, and, the community has no hope. They feel like everybody's against them. They don't believe that there's a God. They see no real reason to love their neighbors. They see a reason to make as much money as they can in order to survive. I think that those values like keep getting imparted and the outcomes keep getting worse. So I kind of struggle to know, without some kind of belief in like God and accountability and right from wrong, I don't know how people really can get out of this situation, because that's another thing that really disturbed me a lot in the education system is that nobody could agree what's right or wrong anymore. And, again, I think a lot of those values used to come from, kind of a biblical worldview, but now they're like, no, we don't want the 10 Commandments. We don't want any of that stuff. And so now it's an argument over everything. Like, is it, right to kill people? Everything's moral relativism. So I personally don't have like loads of hope for the future because I don't see these mindsets changing. I see people against everything that's considered traditional, against everything that was once associated with God. And it's hedonism. It's every man for himself. It's, live for the moment and just live for the maximum amount of pleasure without any thought to what is that going to do to your future? What is that doing to your neighbors? And so with that selfish mindset that's being glamorized, I just wonder how anybody can fix it. And I think every public institution is like scrambling to survive in this kind of world that's getting worse by the moment, where people don't care about people. They don't care to go shoot up a place. They're not even thinking about, why am I going to take 15 innocent people's lives because I lost my job? It's just that really hedonistic, selfish, I'm going to do what I do no matter who it hurts mentality that I think is spreading in the education system and culture and pop, media. And that's kind of what scares me for the future of our world.
Do you think that that's a big reason why we're seeing so much active displays of violence is because what kids are being taught, and we're seeing, I think, the cusp of the first generation who's been going through this process, like you said, 2013 roughly is when it started. Do you think that's why we're starting to see more and more of these violent outbreaks is because, well, I could express myself any way that I want, and I've never had to suffer repercussions for those types of behaviors before. And now that I'm an adult and I can get a hold of a gun or a knife or a car, I could just run, stab, shoot, kill as many people as I want to because that's just me and I can do whatever I want. Do you think that that's correlated?
Absolutely. I think that, not only do people not fear consequences in this life for committing all kind of crimes, like, looting and burning stuff up and everything. They're seeing no law consequences. But since people don't believe in God, they don't believe that they're going to have consequences after they die. Because so much of, I think, what has held back evil in the past is that people thought, okay, even if my boss doesn't catch me stealing, God saw me stealing.
Yeah.
Even if my wife never finds out I'm cheating on her, God knows. And so I know that, the church has been rife with scandals and there's been all kinds of ways that religion has been misused and used to hurt people. But I think in many ways it's done so much good. And when you take out those core tenets and even a belief in God and the afterlife, then people are nihilistic and they are not afraid of anything. They're not even afraid to die in a sense, and they're not afraid who they take with them.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree a lot. I see this again from my own experiences and growing up and being through those types of education programs or behavioral rehab programs, my time in the military, my time overseas. I think there's a very strict correlation with it. And so I'm interested to get your thoughts on this. This sounds brutal when I talk about it. And now I am an anti-violence advocate, 100%. I could care less about anybody's opinion of me. I've stood over dead bodies. I've held people as they breathe their last breath of air. And every single time I always just think, why? Like it's just so heartbreaking, such a waste of life. Um, If I'm a criminal, so when I was a teenager using drugs, we used to break into construction sites, steal the tools, sell it for drug money. We used to break into people's sheds, steal the stuff, sell it for drug money. We didn't go into the sheds for the people whom we thought had guns. We didn't go into the construction sites for the people who had armed security guards. Why? Because we could get hurt, we could get shot, we can get seriously, grievously wounded, and the quality of our life would be greatly degraded. Do you think that if everybody in America or in the world, and I'm not saying for guns specifically, because I don't know how you feel about firearms, but just in general, if everybody knew how to defend themselves against the worst of the worst, most violent criminals, do you think that that could possibly serve as like a universal consequence for these young adults' actions? So, where you couldn't discipline them in the schools for their misbehavior, this would be, in a sense, now I'm not saying we're disciplining them. No, this is life and death defense, but that response from the would be victim could serve as kind of like a guiding force to where people will be less likely to conduct violence and violent crime if there's a good likelihood they'll get shot or killed over it. What are your thoughts on that?
That's a tough one. I once heard a quote that says something like, there's no solutions, only trade offs. So the idea was kind of like for every, thing we choose, we have to pick what we want the potential negatives to be. And so I happen to live in a city that I want to say it might be in like the top 5 or 6 for murders. So it's one part of me is like, man, I wish that guns weren't so readily available because I'm pretty sure there's just multiple murders a week pretty much where I live. And it is sad because it seems like all the wrong people have guns. But then I have heard, the other side say, well, if they went to shoot somebody and that person was armed, then, maybe they would think twice. So I think that what I wish is not a possibility. I wish the only people that could have guns were the people that would be responsible with them. I wish that, but I know that that gets into people saying, well, who gets to decide who is so called fit to have a gun? But when you live, in a city with high crime and gun violence and murder rate, I think, the desire is like, man, I wish that all of these people didn't have the weapons. But I definitely understand too how, if you're out living in a country somewhere, when somebody comes in, having protection is good. So I don't really know the answer to that question, honestly, because I hate the gun violence in my city. And in those neighborhoods, it seems like everybody does have guns, but that doesn't stop people from going and like shooting people. So, but I get again, with a lot of the mass shootings, if there was like, I don't know, 20% of the people that were armed that could take the guy out, they wouldn't get as far. So I don't
Yeah.
know. I'm stuck on that one.
And I don't want to, I really don't want to have like the focus of that question beyond the firearms piece itself, but really more or less, if people just knew how to be more aware and how to defend themselves and their loved ones against violent criminals in general, and if people were less successful at conducting violent acts of crime, So instead of selling drugs and getting $300 for the day, instead of robbing that person and getting an iPhone and selling that for $100 for the day, if people were just generally more aware and capable of defending themselves, do you think that kids would look at crime as less opportunistic and possibly take the job at McDonald's, for example?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think that everybody should know how to defend themselves, and I would love it if everybody had, like, non-lethal weapons, available to protect themselves. I was actually looking at one. I don't know if it's called like a burna or burna gun and some kind of thing. I was like, man, I want one of those because I have like no qualms with self defense. I do struggle a little bit with the gun piece, but I totally get it. And yeah, I think everybody, especially women, it's helpful if they know how to defend themselves from attackers. And yeah, I definitely think if criminals knew if I go, try to rob this gas station, I might get bonked on the head with something and they're prepared to defend themselves and it's going to hurt. I definitely think there would be less of that kind of crime.
Yeah, me too. It's crazy how reliant we've become on the law enforcement that we criticize so vehemently here in America, to where people don't even know how to be aware of criminal behavior as it's walking up to them right in the face. I wanted to see if I could find this book really quick and see if you had ever heard of it. Have you ever heard of Seven Mindsets by Scott Schickler?
Oh, I haven't.
If you get a chance after this, please check it out. He works with kids all over the country. Started in New York, but his program, and he's still running it. I don't know if he is still in charge of it specifically. I think he may have sold it recently, but it's all about shifting the mindset of our youth to teach them that they can accomplish anything in this world, and regardless of how high the standard is or where they come from. So I would definitely recommend maybe checking it out. And it's super simple read, but maybe if you would like to, I can make an introduction and maybe there's some sort of collaborative effort that could be done there for the greater good of everybody.
That'd be awesome. Very cool.
All right. So it seemed as if though inner city schools are being compounded negatively affected by these organizations who are coming in and creating these fictitious results of grandeur, which is actually serving the kids a disservice, which is, further compounded when they attempt or get into like a university or a college on some sort of scholarship program for perhaps underprivileged youth, because then they go to provide the result. The result isn't there. Then they drop out of the school. They drop out of the college. They label it as racist or everybody else's fault because that's what they've been taught from the start, is that if you don't do anything wrong, it's everybody else's fault. And these are the reasons why. And so that further sends them cycling down into an even more negative lifestyle because now they're dropped out of school or they didn't go to school. They didn't bother with school. And now they're within this cycle of their local community where there's a lot of crime taking place, and it just kind of exasperates itself further and further into a cycle of negativity, and then further divides everybody now with the whole critical race theory. Hey, if you're white, you should feel guilty for being a white person. And if you're black, you should hate people because white people because of this. And then even furthermore, now I think we're losing a self identity, because I think as self identity is really important to having a positive and productive lifestyle and what I call the true self, your maximum potential of yourself. But now we're even teaching kids that men can get pregnant. Did you see any of that in your time teaching? Was that a thing yet, or is that more of a newer concept?
I live in the Midwest in a semi-conservative state, even though I'm in a kind of liberal city. So I think we're kind of like a little more insulated from the really like, California, Portland, Oregon stuff. But I'm sure by now it's there because I left in April of 2021. And I do remember one of the administrative leaders saying that, his focus right now was a lot on kind of like the critical race theory stuff, the Black Lives Matters movement, but that next was going to be LGBTQ affirming. So I think I kind of left right before that craze took over. And I did have a couple of small experiences. Maybe around 2016, when I worked at an elementary school, I remember the principal saying there's a little boy that identifies as a girl. He has to be able to use the girls' bathroom. You're not allowed to say anything. Case closed, into story. And that's kind of where my experience with that kind of ended. But I'm seeing what I'm seeing around the country is just astonishing. And I can't imagine it, honestly. And I watched one of the documentaries recently, and it was talking about how kids were identifying as cats and they would meow their answers back and forth, and the teachers just had to deal with it. And I cannot even imagine dealing with that. And then on top of that, the fear of lawsuits and the fear of being attacked, and called like a bigot and all of these other things. It's crazy. I think my hat goes off to anybody that can be in education right now, because I don't think I could do it if they said, here's $200,000 a year. It's just way
And
too much.
I don't think I could do it if they offered me $1 million a year. I mean, it's just insanity to be in that type of an environment. Um, so why did you ultimately leave teaching? I'm assuming it's because of everything that you just have been talking about for the last hour, but so the audience kind of really understands, why'd you end up leaving?
Ultimately, it was starting to take a toll on me as a person. I was getting extremely depressed. I'm kind of a person that's always been like, I'm sure there's an herb and a supplement and a little bit of sunshine and music and I'll be fine. But like, I was getting what they would call clinically depressed. Like, it was hard to get out of bed in the morning. It was hard for me to be happy during the daytime. I randomly started breaking down crying at work a few times. And at that time, I had so much else going on in my world. Just like, I felt like every aspect of my life there was some kind of like hard thing happening. So it literally got too much for me to be able to bear. And just the thought of continuing to go to work, even though the school year was almost done, I was like, I literally don't think I can do this. I finally went to a doctor and I was like, because I had mentioned to my doctor before that I was like depressed being a teacher. And she like thought about, hey, should you do antidepressants? I'm like, no way, those are so not for me. But I actually got to a point of desperation where I was like, oh, okay, I'll try it. I tried like counseling, telehealth counseling, in-person counseling. I was just doing all the things they said to do, to get out of the funk that I was in, and it just wasn't happening. The depression wasn't lifting. And I had a weird mix of anxiety with it. It's kind of like a really strange blend to feel both depressed and anxious, but it was like really starting to overcome me. And I would just be so bummed out on my breaks that I would just look at like Reddit teacher rants to kind of make myself feel like I wasn't alone. And some people mentioned something called an SMLA, which is like a family medical leave of absence. And it's something that you can do, if either you're sick or a family member is sick. So I was like, what the heck? I'll see if I can get approved for this, just to see if I can, not go back to the rest of the school year. But overall, during that school year, I had started at a brand new place. It was kind of right after like the end of the pandemic, but we were still kind of under all of the, regulations. I was online teaching. I had in-person kids. We were trying to do all the regulations with mask and spacing and all of that different stuff. And I just found the kids were not doing any work. I probably had about 90% of kids that were turning in absolutely nothing. Yet the teachers were still always being berated. Why are the test scores so low? Because we would do these kind of computer tests. So you can't really cheat on those. So it would show where the kids actually were, and we're constantly getting in trouble. And the kids were just really kind of disrespectful. Like, they would just kind of like play games all day, even silly ones. Like, one of my roles is that, you need to be sitting up straight, looking at the board, ready to learn. So I had a group of girls that would fall asleep on purpose, like every day. They would wait into the last minute. This was middle school, to come into class. And the second we were in class, I'd have 5 girls asking to go to the bathroom. And it seemed like really silly little things, but it's like slow psychological warfare with like the kids doing everything they can to not do what they're supposed to do. And just knowing that, if I bring this up, it's going to be like, oh, well, did you try to build a relationship with them? Oh, well, why is it that they don't like you? What are you doing wrong? And then calling the parents and knowing either they might get mad at me and say, oh, well, my daughter said that you da 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 da. And so it was just like this anxiety of always knowing that no matter what, I'm in trouble. I'm in trouble if I say something. I'm in trouble if I don't. I'm in trouble if they don't score well. I'm in trouble, if I like make up scores and somebody finds out. It was just like all this pressure all the time. And I was just tired of feeling like I wasn't valued at all. Because in spite of all the craziness, like I would try my best to show up every day with tons of energy and charisma. I would find all of these interesting educational resources to tie into the lessons to try to make the boring curriculum more fun. I feel like I was doing everything I could possibly do to be the best teacher I could be, but yet it was just never enough. Because I think if as a teacher you're trying to compete with like TikTok or with Fortnite or with all of the things they have available to them, there's just no comparison. Like I could never do it. If the kids aren't coming to the classroom, like I have to do this work. I have to learn. I have to pay attention. I have to master these concepts or I'm going to be in trouble. Basically, you reduce the teachers to like a sideshow performer and they're always blamed no matter what. So I just finally got tired of it. Like there was always like some great kids. There were always some great parents. There was always great coworkers, but just the feeling of like being a joke essentially as my job. Like I'm doing everything I can, and yet these kids still have such a bratty attitude. They're still purposely trying to go against me every day for no reason. I just flat out ran out of gas. I was like, I don't think I can do this anymore. It's kind of like a long drawn out answer, but that's just like some of the reasons why I was finally done after 8 years.
Wow, 8 years. That's remarkable. Kudos to you for even making it that long, quite honestly. And I wish that there were. I used to have this like affinity for teachers in my adult years, not as a kid, obviously, but as I became an adult, I grew this true affinity for educators, men and women who wanted to just contribute to the beauty and the quality of young kids' lives. And in the last like 5 years, I find myself looking at teachers like I don't have any respect for you because of everything that you've talked about, and I could tell that you were definitely one of the educators that I had that feeling for, and so thank you for whatever contributions you were attempting to make, even though it might have felt fruitless at times. From the bottom of my heart, absolutely thank you for your efforts. Um, so I could talk to you probably for 6 more weeks about everything that you've encountered and correlate that with my experiences, just to kind of I don't know try to understand what's happening in our society a little bit more. But how can people get in touch with you? How can they find you? And what are you doing nowadays? What do you find yourself doing to educate people?
Yeah. So before I get to that, I do want to mention I always like to say I think 80% of teachers are still normal. I think because of all the viral TikTok videos of like extremist woke nuts that go viral, especially in the conservative community, there's a huge hatred for teachers right now. So I just like to tell people I think more teachers feel like me than not. Maybe in some like weird pockets of the United States, more are crazy than not. But I think the average teacher is just so done. Even before the pandemic, 50% of all teachers would quit within the first 5 years. And of course, it was even higher in inner city context. And so I just think that the education system is so broken and teachers feel so trapped. Like, thank goodness that, I'm married and my husband is able to support me, or I probably would feel like I still had to be stuck in that system. And so I do think it's one of those things that becomes kind of soul crushing. You feel like you have to push down your inner voice and conscience and all that you see is wrong just to survive. So I do like to, let people know that I think a lot of teachers probably feel the way parents do, and to just try your best to like talk to the teacher and get to know them. Don't assume that every teacher is like an intentional woke Marxist. Because I made a comment on somebody's video saying like, oh, I'd love to interview this person. They'd be awesome. And somebody commented underneath like, oh, good luck getting through to teachers, like they're all woke Marxists. And I'm like, I don't think the average teacher has any idea what Marx taught. Like, I think teachers, just like I was in the situation, I was like, I don't understand what's going wrong. I don't know where these crazy philosophies are coming from. So I just want to tell that to your audience. But as for me, like I've just been doing the teacher therapy channel where I feel like at least if I can tell the truth, that would be a huge first step. Cause I just remember when I was in the classroom feeling like I was the only one. Cause it's like, they really give you the Kool-Aid strong and then you get afraid. Can I even talk to my coworkers about this? Or are they going to tell the principal on me? It's like really kind of a weird system. And so I
For
just like to talk about these issues, for people to know that they're not alone, they're not crazy. And, there's just been like hundreds, if not thousands of people that have written and said, I've experienced everything you have, thanks for telling the truth. And so I think, for just your audience, if they have like school age kids, and they're still in the system, I'd say just do your best to like, have a good relationship with the teacher and don't assume they're like a crazed Marxist before getting to know them.
Well, that's a really great point. Because when we start to search for these items, of course, our algorithms are designed to be negatively biased. And so, if I'm sitting there searching on about teachers or educating myself on the current, school administration, I'm probably going to get a lot of information that's going to make me believe that teachers are, in fact, what you just said right there, these woke Marxists. And so that's good to know. And that's very heart checking. Like, yeah, I need to be open to the fact that a lot of them are probably in these weird predicaments. Um, what advice do you have for Americans, for parents, for students, for those teachers who are within these strange catch-22 situations? What do you have to say? What advice do you have to say to them in terms of, you know, where you're coming from, what you've learned, what you've seen, and moving forward to have the most positive possible outcome in this life? What would you have to say to everybody?
Yeah, I would really encourage parents not to expect for the school to be your child's number one educator anymore. I think there was a time where you sent your kids to school and you're like, all right, they're reading, writing, and arithmetic is taken care of. They're fine. But I think at this day and age, too, even like, minus the woke stuff, even with the curriculum changes and Common Core and switching back and forth with state standards, there's no telling, like, if your kid is getting their educational needs met. So I would encourage parents to just look up, something as simple as what should a fifth grader know? What are the math, the English, the social studies things, and be talking to your kids about what are you learning in school? Hey, what are you doing in social studies? And a lot of parents will find that social studies and history is totally gone from, the first through fifth curriculum in most places, especially struggling and underperforming schools. So I would really encourage parents to take back some of that, leverage and be your child's number one educator and teach them morals explicitly and clearly. So if you do not want your child to come home believing that a man can get pregnant, teach your kid explicitly women get pregnant and men don't. Teach them. If you hear anybody saying this, it's a lie and don't believe it. I think kids, parents have to be that intentional now with their kids, because I think, in yesteryear, you could just assume that everyone was on the same page, but now you really can't necessarily assume it. And so I would also encourage parents to really be very serious about character education. Whatever your background is, whatever your moral values are, just like make sure you're explicitly teaching kids, not to lie and steal and cheat and hurt other people. Like, they're probably not getting those morals from anywhere, not even like the historically children centered shows like Blue's Clues and Sesame Street and stuff. It's like there's almost nothing in culture right now that are imparting good morals and values to kids. So I would encourage parents to really take that back and really ask what's going on in the classroom, check in with the teachers, ask them what they're learning. And I think having like a non-confrontational, non-adversarial stance, and instead just like a curious, I want to be a partner with you stance for the teacher will get them very, very far. I think as for teachers, we still have a really big impact, even if we feel stifled. So whenever I had opportunities to do character education with my students, I would do it. As much as I could, I would teach them the value of hard work. I would teach them the value of honesty. I would try to set a culture in my room where there was cooperation and kindness and people weren't bullying each other and making fun of each other. So even if you're in kind of an oppressive system, for the most part, once you shut the door, it's your classroom. You have a lot more that you can impart than you might think you would. Again, it's just that attitude of being intentional, like, what kind of impact do I want to leave on these kids? What do I want them to remember from being in my class? And so I think teachers can still make a difference. There's so many kids that don't have any good role models. And so I think, if you find yourself working with kids, just prioritizing kindness toward them and talking to them and telling them the truth. If they're doing something crazy, I would tell my students all the time, you know what, if I were to do and talk like you just did to me towards my boss, I'd be fired. So just giving them real world situations that says, if you were to talk to a stranger on the street like you just did, little Billy, that might end up in a really serious fight in a situation. So just tell kids the truth in, an age appropriate, kind way, so that even if, they're getting 10 messages somewhere else, hey, maybe that seed sticks in their mind one day and they're like, oh, I remember, my teacher told me XYZ. And we just kind of never know what seeds we're planting. We never know, the impact we can have on somebody's life.
Yeah, that's very true. I know that there's been some weird seeds that have come up later on in my life, lessons that I've been taught that I didn't really recognize for years until, either fortunately or unfortunately, it was in time or too late. So, well, Trish, I really appreciate your time. Again, I mean, I could talk to you about Common Core and the history and the science and so many other things within the education industry. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I will please do check out the 7 mindsets. And if you really want, I'm positive I can make a connection to you and the founder to maybe find some sort of collaborative, positive type of thing that we can contribute or give to kids in the country. So thank you very much. If you ever need anything from me at all, please feel free to reach out. And for everybody watching this, what a beautiful, beautiful, woman with such an amazing and honest perspective. She was not afraid to speak her mind objectively, which is so difficult to do when you're in these situations because there's a lot of the things that she worked for in her life and her character included, is put at risk when you have people attacking you because it makes you question yourself. So please follow her advice. Please check her out at Teacher Therapy. That is her YouTube channel. She's got some amazing work done on there. And feel free to always do what's right and what's best within your heart and morally and honestly. So thank you very much, Trish. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me. This was a great conversation.